Sports, 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 sports.
Hey there, sports fans. Welcome to Sportsball, part of the SPDM Crew podcast. We talk about sports-related topics, but we focus on you, the fan, and what you like, whether it's a sport, team, event, sports-related topic, or an athlete. This week, we are talking about the Washington Commanders. After it's been a couple weeks since they bested my Chicago Bears with a crazy Hail Mary pass that the Bears didn't even deserve to win that game in the first place. But just because it happened in such a heartbreaking way, I needed a little bit of time away from the Washington Commanders. But I think I'm ready now. Three losses total in terms of weird things happening, whether it's a blocked field goal or losing in overtime, what have. So I think it was time. And I'm bringing on my buddy who it's been a while since we've chatted. We used to work together at a place called Lead America, which boy, those were the days, right? So I have here my friend Mike Parks. Mike, how's it going?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing well. Thanks for the introduction. It took you some time to get over the Hail Mary loss to Washington, but now I'm kind of heartbroken. My team just had one of the craziest games I can remember, lost to our arch rival. So I'll try to do my best, but I'm still kind of reeling from that loss.
Well, I appreciate you sacrificing nobly to talk to me today. So Commanders are in a bit of an interesting spot this year. Dare I say overachieving based on what a lot of people projected them to be at this year. But before we get into this season, I kind of want to hear how'd you become a Washington Commanders fan in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm of the age, and I'm from the Washington D.C. area, and I'm of the age where me and my peers grew up sort of hearing about this legendary dynasty, this franchise that used to be called the Washington Redskins, coming off several Super Bowl victories throughout the 80s. And as I was growing up as a kid, I kind of just missed it. But my dad was really into the team. All my friends' dads are really into the team. They had just experienced this golden age of winning Super Bowls and being a perennial great team. And so I sort of always grew up hearing about it and hoping for it. And my generation is kind of the generation that learned how to lose. We've seen nothing good, really. I mean, we had a brief period of time with Robert Griffin just over a decade ago, but that was a flash in the pan. It was kind of it didn't really work out. And I would say I got really into Washington football through playing Madden. And so I would play Madden with my friends, and they used to have the historic mode where you could use players from the past. So I would use some of those legendary players from the 80s, like John Riggins and Art Monk, and I would sort of fantasize about that being my team, even though it was a reach because my team was never good when I was playing Madden. But Madden sort of helped me get into the more nerdy, cerebral aspects of football. And I've always, I think if we're talking about how I became a fan, I have to call out Darryl Green, who, when I was a kid, I think he was the spread that weaved my generation to the previous generation because he played up until just about his 40s. So he won those Super Bowls with the previous generation, and then he continued playing. He's a Hall of Fame corner. He continued playing so that my generation could sort of watch him play. We sort of got to have him as our piece of that dynasty pie. So if I had to answer, I would say my dad got me into the team, and then playing Madden sort of got me invested. And then having Darryl Green sort of connect me to the previous generation and my generation to that previous generation, those might be the three pillars of how I became a hardcore Washington football fan.
Oh, you mentioned that Robert Griffin the third year, and it really bums me out that you said it was about a decade ago. Man, that feels like that doesn't feel right, but it also makes sense considering he was on ESPN for a brief spat where he was doing pretty good as an analyst. Uh, but I remember that rookie year of his where he was electric, and
Yeah.
I thought that Washington had found somebody that was going to go the distance for them, and It just, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as he was like a failure or anything like that. I think more along the lines, the guy just couldn't stay healthy enough to actually be be someone that you could depend upon long term.
Yeah, and it's still to this day when you listen to Washington sports radio or when you watch or read the Washington sports blog, it's still a pretty contentious debate of trying to figure out what happened. How much was it Robert Griffin's knee? How much was it Robert Griffin's ego? How much was it the old owner Dan Snyder trying to meddle too much in Mike Shanahan's business? It's still a pretty heated debate. Some people say we never should have gone to Kirk Cousins. We should have given Robert Griffin another chance. So I think it's a touchy subject in Washington sports still to this day. We're still kind of digesting what happened, and I think that's also I don't want to skip ahead of the agenda here, but I think a lot of Washington fans are really apprehensive to get too excited about Jaden Daniels now because we're still processing what happened with Robert Griffin. Is it happening again? So there's a lot of parallels, and I think we're still kind of analyzing what happened and what's happening now.
As somebody who also has a bit of a cursed franchise when it comes to quarterbacks, but the difference is that it's the organization that sucks more than anything
Yeah.
about developing a quarterback. I empathize with you a lot, and I hear you, I see you, and I'm hoping for the best for you because Jada Daniels looks fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting where we kind of have a little bit of a twin experience here, just in that we have both. So you're a Bears fan, I'm a Washington football fan. We both are probably of the age where our dads or the generation before us experienced great teams, but we didn't. And now we both in the same year, you guys drafted Caleb Williams, number one, and then right after you, we drafted Jaden Daniels, number two. And we're both kind of seeing, like, we're trying not to get our hopes up, but there's some encouraging signs and there's some maybe red flags and trying not to be overly optimistic. So we're both kind of living this twin shared experience of, do we finally have our guy, but we don't want to get our heart broken. So let's see how it goes.
For sure. Before we get into the now, I do want to talk a little bit more about, give me some of your favorite memories growing up as a back then Redskins fan, talking about what were some of your favorite moments that you either got to witness live or witness on TV or just experience with friends and just family and anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been mostly lows, but there have definitely been some highs. I referred to Darrell Green already. Anytime Darrell Green would make a play, it kind of, when I was a kid, it kind of made me feel like, oh yeah, see, I'm still part of this legendary franchise. If he won Super Bowls, and now I'm watching him live, so it's all tied together. So anytime Darrell Green would make a play, that was always really exciting for me. Obviously, we talked about Robert Griffin, but when he came out of the gate, one of our local sports writers described it as shock and awe. That first game against the Saints, and Robert Griffin just torched the Saints that first game. And I was at my friend Chad's house, and we all sort of thought, we finally made it. We're home. How could this possibly go wrong? So that was obviously a highlight. When Joe Gibbs came back, so for those who don't know, Joe Gibbs was the coach who led Washington in the 80s. He won those 3 Super Bowls. He retired from football for a couple decades and then came back in, I want to say 2005. When Joe Gibbs came back in 2005, I mean, that was like the second coming, for lack of a better analogy. And we finally had a leader, someone we trusted, come in, and it went really well. And he got us into the playoffs for the first time in a long time. I think we're just a wild card. I mean, nobody had Super Bowl aspirations, but it was Joe Gibbs at the helm. We finally went on this 5-game win streak to end the season. I think 2006 or 2005. We made the wild card. Things were looking really good. That was a really exciting time. Sean Taylor was coming of age at that point. He looked like a world beater. When you're watching they were the Redskins back then. he would fly off the screen and just make these incredible plays. And we knew we had something special. Obviously, that was another tragedy in itself. He rest in peace, Sean Taylor. But that was a great, exciting time. We had exciting talent on the field, and we had Joe Gibbs at the helm. That was probably the highest I've been as a Washington fan that I can remember.
Well, you brought it up that there's some lowlights. The death of Sean Taylor obviously being among one of them. Which yeah, that was really sad when that happened. Are there any other that kind of stick out? Because you had Dan Snyder as an owner. I'm sure that couldn't have been fun. But are there any others that kind of stand out besides Sean Taylor's death, and then I guess also like when Robert Griffin started to kind of just fall apart?
So I'll go through a couple more lowlights, but then I want to actually make a point of emphasis on the ownership change, going back to the highlights. I should have mentioned that to begin with. But in terms of lowlights, I was at the Robert Griffin playoff game versus the Seahawks, where we went out to a 14-0 lead. This is his rookie year. This is still when, shock and awe, we thought we had our guy. We thought we had another decade ahead of us of Super Bowls. I was at that game.
Oh,
wow. I was behind the end zone where he hurt his knee, the final knee injury, basically, that really turned the tide. So that was maybe the big low light. I mean, that stadium was ecstatic at one point. We were up 14-0. The Seahawks sort of started inching their way back into the game, and then Robert Griffin goes down with his knee injury. It was the second knee injury, but this is sort of the one where we said, okay, it's not a blemish, this is a pattern, this is the theme. And walking out of that stadium with a loss, a devastating loss, I was separated from my friends somehow. Nobody even wanted to talk to each other. I mean, that was the main low light. It was sort of the fall from greatness. And then you mentioned Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder, I have been taking some grad school classes, and one of my assignments was to propose a reorganization of a business. And I wrote about the Commanders and getting rid of Dan Snyder, and it was a cathartic experience for me. Mm-hmm. Dan Snyder, I mean, at the time that he sold the team, which was just now about a year and a half ago, when he sold the team, our team was dealing with, we were under investigation by federal agencies for financial misconduct. We were under investigation for rampant patterns of sexual with cheerleaders and with the organization, the small, mindless sabotaging in places, and just doing the smallest thing. So he's really the kind of guy who, right now, I think he's living in Europe because I think he wanted to escape his notoriety in the United States. But he's just one of these guys who he's always had so much wealth and so many people saying yes, sir, between him and reality, that he's just never been in touch with reality. He's done so many small, petty, disgusting things, and he's owned the team, and he owned the team from 1999 up until 2022. So I gotta say, I was remiss not to call this a highlight, but when he finally was forced to sell the team, that was a highlight in itself. Even though it's on the business side of things, it's not really sports related, but finally getting rid of him and having a new owner and like a fresh start is one of the great highlights, which is kind of sad to say. It's one of the great highlights of my lifetime being a Washington football fan. I should have called that out the first time, but it really is.
I hear you there. So a lot of good came from the selling of the team, and hopefully a better direction moving forward. One other thing as well, because in addition to the team being sold, there's always been a lot of controversy around the name Redskins. So I guess I'm wondering from your perspective, what's it been like with the name change from Redskins to Commanders?
Yeah, it's a nuanced question. I think it's something that people in the Washington area feel one way, and then the national perspective is another thing. The name was changed sort of in the wake of the social movements of 2020 following George Floyd and some of the cultural tides of change. I'll share my perspective, which might, and I don't want to speak for anyone else. So I'm just speaking for myself, my experience growing up a Washington fan. So Washington, D.C., for those who don't know, is people have called it Chocolate City. It's been a nickname of the city. It's a majority city where there's a lot of, well, you've got your Capitol Hill white collar part of DC, but then you've got there's a lot of African American population in DC, and I think and my dad is one of these. He's from DC. He's African American. He's very much part of that community, and I'm just for context, I'm mixed. But so just setting context, from my dad, the way we grew up, we sort of liked having a mascot who looked more like us. And our arch rivals were the Dallas Cowboys. And so we kind of always had a chip on our shoulder. We kind of identified with the mascot who was a minority. So that was always kind of a thing. And I think a lot of DC locals, I think a lot of the DC community has felt that way. Now, I can't defend the name Redskins. I think it's obviously insensitive, if not offensive. So I wouldn't defend that name. I think that it's probably a good thing that the name changed. Now, here's where the nuance comes in. I like the logo. I have always thought that the logo, which was depicted a Native American, handsome, stoic Native American warrior, I don't think anyone wants their mascot to be ugly or cowardly. You pick a mascot who you revere and admire. And so that's what we had. We had a handsome, stoic Native American. I don't think that was offensive at all. Mm-hmm. If I had to predict where the team's going to be in 5 years, I don't think the old name is ever coming back. It doesn't pass smell test. But I would not be surprised if the logo comes back and maybe the team reverts to, Washington football team, or maybe the original name, which was the Brave, which I think is another admirable term that, yes, you could say that it appropriates an ethnicity, but it's in a positive light, I think. And a question that I would just pose to anyone who's listening who feels uncomfortable about the Braves or the Native American logo, at what point is it? I mean, if we say that we can't do that and we just have the Vikings and the Celtics and the Raiders, I mean, do we want only white mascots? I mean, is that what we want? I don't know the answer, but it's a fair question. I think if you have the handsome-looking, stoic Braves Native American logo, I don't think that that's a bad thing. That's just my opinion. I'm not speaking for anyone but myself. That's sort of where I am. So I sort of laid a lot out there. I think there's a lot of nuance. I don't like to call anyone right or wrong because I think it's an emotional topic, right, and I have my own experience with it. But I think I will speak for a lot of DC people when I say I think we are more tired of talking about it than we are interested in it. So I think I'm glad you asked, because we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it. But right. I think most people would just, they don't like Commanders, but they would rather have the Commanders and not have to talk about it anymore than anything else. And we didn't want to be the bad guys anymore. I think a lot of us were tired of people saying that we're racist. We grew up with this team. It's just a team. So.
Well, but the other thing too is that you're right. It is a more nuanced topic, unfortunately. As somebody who has a team in my backyard, the Blackhawks, that has a very, very rich history with like Indigenous and Native American culture, it's hard though, because you have a fair amount of people here in Chicago who are kind of on both sides of the debate. And at the end of the day, it's your team. And I appreciate the fact you're giving me your thoughts. And I appreciate the fact that saying like, hey, I can only speak for myself, and I can only speak to what people I know in DC are kind of tired of with that. So appreciate your thoughts on that. You mentioned that Commanders, nobody's really thrilled with the team Commander. And you mentioned the Braves. Were there any other like names out there that you're like, man, I wish that they would have chosen that instead of Commanders?
Yeah, so there were a couple names that I really liked. I actually was a big fan of Washington football team. So there was
Mhm.
that year-long hiatus where we weren't yet the Commanders, but we had stopped referring to ourselves as the Redskins, and we were just the Washington football team. I I actually liked that because it was kind of a change, but
Mhm.
also not a change. So
Right.
if you don't have a new name, then your name really hasn't changed, but we're not saying the bad word anymore. So I kind
Mhm.
of like that. But I like the Braves because again, that one it's not really a change, but we're still not saying the bad word. I like some of the names that harken back to our history. So in the '80s, we were known for our offensive line, and they were called the Hogs. And so a lot of people wanted to change to the Hogs or the Red Hog. I liked that idea. It would have been okay. Would have been fine with that. And then I think that there was a big contingent of people who wanted to do what we eventually did, which was something around the military. We're Washington, D.C., we're the nation's capital. We should have something to do with the military, and no one can get upset with that. So we sort of landed on the Commanders. I think I'm okay with it. I don't hate it. Again, my main thing is let's play football.
Mhm.
But I liked the names that were either sort of a not change or referred to our old history with the Hog.
The only other name that I'll throw out there, I love the movie The Replacements and
Oh yeah,
the Washington Sentinels. I think that would have been
yeah,
awesome, but I get it. Commanders is fine, like you said. But I do agree with you. The whole premise behind Washington football team, just keeping it at that and just calling it a day. I
yeah,
think that would have been interesting if they just would have stuck with that. But we know modern sports, right? It's all about branding. It's all about all
yeah,
kinds of different shit like that. So,
yeah.
hey, it is what it is. So let's get back to actual football on the field and let's talk about current state of the team. So, how you feeling about the current state of the team? Because it sounds like you're cautiously optimistic, which is fair. I do get that, but how you feeling overall about how this year has been playing out so far?
I think cautiously optimistic is the right way to put it. So it's funny. It's funny timing to be having this conversation.
Mhm.
When when you and I first started planning this conversation, we were red hot,
Yeah.
and I was I was telling my family members, this isn't sustainable. We can't keep this up. I'm still dealing with RG3 trauma. I don't want to get my hopes up and get hurt again. I think we have to put perspective. If we go back in time to the beginning of this season, before we started playing games, I think most people were in a let's wait and see, not really expecting a playoff run, not really expecting to see a great team.
Mm.
Uh, and then and then the team just kind of started kicking ass
Yeah.
and scoring tons of points. And Jaden Daniels was putting up these statistics that were just unbelievable. I mean, 80% completion percentage through several games and so many yards and rushing yards. And he broke some rushing plus passing yard records for a rookie. And it was just kind of unbelievable. And I think we were all drinking the Kool-Aid, but we were all saying, well, wait a second, this isn't, if he's on pace to be the greatest of all time. So let's just chill. And then right now, we have sort of had a reality check. The last three games in order were a 1 point loss to the Steelers. The Steelers are a good team. They're going to be in the playoffs. And then a loss to the Eagles where we were in the lead most of the game, and then things kind of just unraveled at the end of the game. The Eagles are another really good team who are going to be in the playoffs. So those two games, we looked competitive against two really good teams. So while they were two losses, it wasn't discouraging because we really are an up and coming new team, and we're hanging around with these really good teams. But then this last game against Dallas, who is playing Cooper Rush as their quarterback, backup quarterback, they're dealing with injuries. They are not supposed to be a good team. I think the spread was Washington favored by 10.5 points. and we sort of just laid an egg. And we got beat by our arch rival in what was one of the craziest games I've ever seen. I mean, we had 3 or 4 once in a season type of tragic plays all occurred in the same game, which this is what happens against your arch rival. It's kind of the storybook Murphy's Law kind of thing.
Right.
So I think cautiously optimistic, but also I don't know what to think. I mean, I'm a little bit shell shocked by that game. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, we should have won the game. We tried several different ways to lose the game, and then we tried several different ways to miraculously win the game, and we still lost, missing the extra point as the clock was going out. I mean, I'm a little shell shocked. So I want to wait and see what happens. We've got 4 or 5 more games left in the season. Maybe we'll make the playoffs. I think we will, but I'm so cautious. I think I'm cautiously optimistic, but more emphasis on caution right now.
Right. No, I totally get that. So in order for you to get from cautiously optimistic to, yep, this is it, putting your obvious GM hat on, that everything, all the ends, like end all be all when it comes to football, what do you think the Commanders need in order for them to be true title contenders, as opposed to kind of just beating up on a lot of the lowly teams in the NFC East, particularly this year, because the Giants are a dumpster fire. The Cowboys are having an uncharacteristic off year. And then there's the Eagles, who's going to be, at least they're up there. So what's something that you think that the Commanders need right now in order for you to feel like a little bit better about the situation?
So right now, I would describe the Commanders as the kind of team that no one should really want to play against. I think the Commanders could probably beat just about any team in the league. However, I think we have too many liabilities to expect us to actually go on a run. If you want to make it to the Super Bowl, you need to go on a 4 or 5 game win streak. I don't see that happening. And I think our weaknesses are, if you look at our offense, we have a lot of good players. We don't have enough exceptional players. Terry McLaurin is our best player, not named Jaden Daniels. So we've got that one weapon on the outside, Terry McLaurin. Other than him, I don't think any of our players are elite or even really much above average, but they're just kind of adequate. And so when you have that on offense, when you look at the Eagles game, they were double and triple covering Terry McLaurin all game long, and they took him out of the game. He wasn't able to do anything. There's no one else on our offense who we can punish you with if you take Terry McLaurin out of the game. So if you're like the Eagles and you have enough talent to man up across the board and then double team Terry McLaurin, we're kind of shit out of luck. We don't have any other answers.
Right.
We got to hope that Jaden Daniels can do something exceptional. Maybe he will, but that's not something you want to hang your hat on. On defense, our secondary is just not good enough. When we played the Eagles and the Steelers, we kept it close because we put 8 or 9 guys in the box and we stopped the run, and we sort of dared the other team to throw the ball and take their chances. And both teams did, and they were successful. We kept it close, but again, when we're going against those good teams, they took their chances and they won. Our secondary just is not talented enough to hang around with the good teams who have in our division. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, they're going to beat us. They just are. They're good enough. Our secondary is not good enough. So on defense, it's our secondary. On offense, we just don't have the dominant guys. When you look at the NFL, the good teams, again, the Eagles, they have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. You got to pick your poison, and when you pick your poison, then there's Saquon Barkley. We don't have that. We've got just Terry McLaurin. If you take him out, then it's just a man-to-man. We'll try to beat you, but I'm not very confident that we're going to man up against anyone else who's got a good defense.
How are you feeling about because Ron Rivera was the coach for a long time. He definitely had his ups and downs as as a coach for the team, but how you feeling so far about Dan Quinn as head coach moving forward?
I like Dan Quinn. So this is another one of those narratives where I think if you ask people in the DC silo what they think, it'll be different from the national media storyline. So during the offseason, a lot of the national media was saying, oh, Washington's going to hire Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator from Detroit.
Right.
A lot of people were saying that, and then Ben Johnson decided he wanted to stay in Detroit, and the national media was saying, okay, well, Washington got their second choice with Dan Quinn. I don't think that that's true. I think Dan Quinn was our first choice, and I think a lot of the reporters in Washington know that. If you look at the coaching staff that we've put in place, I think a lot of it is due to Dan Quinn is a beloved and highly respected figure in the NFL. And so the Cliff Kingsbury, the coaching staff, the assistant coaches, the coordinators who we have in place who are responsible for this surprisingly successful season so far, I think a lot of them are here because of Dan Quinn. I don't know that they would be here if we ended up hiring an inexperienced but potentially exciting Ben Johnson or whatever his name is. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy with Dan Quinn. When you listen to the players and the coaches, when they're in there's a real sense of camaraderie and togetherness. The guys are always engaged. You can tell a team when they're losing, when they're on the sideline having side conversations, that they're not engaged. But when you look at the Commanders, even when we're losing, the sidelines are watching. They're standing up. They're engaged with what's happening, and every breath is together, engaged with what's happening on the field. And I credit Dan Quinn for that. I really like Dan Quinn. I think people in the NFL really respect him and admire him. So I'm on board with Dan Quinn. I'm all on board.
Awesome. Well, that's something as a Bears fan, very, very envious of, because it looks like our head coach is on the way out. So hopefully the Bears can get it right. What's the outlook on the rest of the season? I mean, it's the Commanders are in a pretty good spot to at least at minimum get a playoff spot or like a wild card spot. Got a good chance at the division. So what to you will define a successful year?
And now we're kind of coming back down to reality. I think if you told me at the beginning of the year that this is where we would be at week 12 or week 13, I would say I'll take it. This is what we were looking for. This is what we were hoping for. So in that regard, we are having a successful season if you start with where we started at the beginning of the season. Right now, I think still the sky's the limit. Like I said, I would not be shocked to see the Commanders beat you name it. You can put us against any team. I think we can hang because of Jaden Daniels and what he can do. I think we can hang with anyone. So could we go on an exciting run through December and January? I think so. I'll be at the edge of my seat. Do I expect a Super Bowl run? No. I think the last month or so has shown us that we're not quite ready to be reliably great right now. So what I would like to see the rest of the season is, number one, let's stay healthy. Jaden Daniels coming into the season, the question was, does he have the physique to hang around the NFL? He's a pretty skinny guy. So let's stay healthy. And then how can we handle the adversity? We were on a 3-game losing streak. Are we going to hang our heads? Are things going to unravel and spiral? Or are we going to, this team fighters? I think the team is fighters. So I want to see that. I want to see us compete the rest of the season, make the playoffs. Let's go beat a good team in the playoffs maybe. Mm-hmm. And let's have a season. Let's scare some people and let's go for a run. That's what I'd like to see.
Well, very much power to you and the Commanders. Hopefully they'll have a successful rest of the year. We've talked a little bit about football, and I would be remiss if as a Washington, like a person who's from the DC area, I would be remiss not to at least ask, are you following this situation, or the not situation, but are you following Alexander Ovechkin's quest to unseat Wayne Gretzky as the all-time leading goal scorer in the NHL?
I'm following it on bated breath. So for context, Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal record was one of those records that was supposed to be untouchable for the last 30 years or whatever. It's just sort of been a given that no one will ever score that many goals. And then, and partly because back in the 80s, when Gretzky was playing, it was normal for a hockey game to have the winning team scores 8 goals and the losing team scores 7 goals. Compared to nowadays, when a normal game is 4-3 or 3-2. So that change in the NHL alone makes it unbelievable that Alex Ovechkin is approaching this record. And then Ovechkin comes out this season with one of his fastest paces of his entire career. He was leading the league in goals through however many games this is. And then he got injured. He just got injured about a week ago, I think. And he's going to miss 5 or 6 weeks, it looks like. And so that just sort of made it exciting all over again. He's 39 years old. He's going to be dealing with injuries for the rest of his career, however long he plays. We just kind of hope that he can stay healthy or get healthy and stay healthy. And if he can continue even close to the pace where he was on, he's going to break the record. He's already, in my eyes, the greatest goal scorer of all time. Wayne Gretzky is the greatest hockey player of all time, all-around hockey player. He facilitated, he made everyone else around him better. But in terms of just pure goal scoring, Alex Ovechkin is already the best, in my opinion. He makes it look so easy how deadly accurate he is, how fast he can get a shot off, how he sort of has a knack for using the defender as a screen to shield the goalie's vision so that the puck just sort of appears from out behind the defender and it's going bullseye into the corner of the net. No one does it like that. No one's ever done it like that. That's why I think he's going to break the record. I think he's the kind of guy who he's just going to play until he breaks the record. He's going to be in his 40s soon. He's got gray hair. He's got the gray beard. He's visibly slower than he used to be, but he's the greatest goal scorer of all time. I think he deserves to break the record, and I think he will. I hope he can come back healthy and do just enough to break the record because I think he deserves it.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. As somebody who I grew up with Wayne Gretzky as somebody that I idolized and somebody that I love from a hockey perspective, I would be fine ceding this record to Alexander Ovechkin, who's just kind of been a model for NHL players, sticking with the same team throughout the course of his career, bringing a championship to that team as well. So couldn't have asked for a better player. Mike, is there anything else from a sports perspective that you wanted to kind of bring up or something that you wanted to chat about?
No, I think you just touched on it with Alex Ovechkin. That's sort of we're always hoping for a Stanley Cup run, but this is one of those rare times that I can remember in my lifetime of watching sports where that's not the most important thing. And it's remarkable that there's this record at stake and we're watching it live. So yeah, that was the only other thing. I mean, I'm a Washington Commanders fan first, but what Ovechkin is on the precipice of is remarkable for DC fans and for hockey fans and for sports fans in general. So that would have been the only other thing. I'm glad you asked me about that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Mike, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for taking time out of your long ass drive to talk to me. Do you have anything you want to plug, or do you care to share any social media where anybody can come chat more sports with you for the Washington D.C. area?
I appreciate it. I'm not really that big into social media. I don't have anything to plug. I would just say, hail to the Commanders, go Ovechkin, and good luck to you with the Bears and Chicago sports. And I hope things pan out for Caleb Williams, because I think he could be really exciting for a few years to come here. And it would be great to see sort of the competition between Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I'm hoping that is going to be a lot of fun moving forward. So I wholeheartedly agree. Appreciate that and appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Mike.
My pleasure. Happy Thanksgiving, Mike.
You as well.
Bye.
That's going to do it for this episode of Sportsball. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website at spcrew.com. Shout out to HiFlyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any marketing, logo, or brand standard needs, contact them at HiFlyerCreative.com. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM Crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever.